Semantico, a specialist software company who creates innovative digital publishing solutions for publishers and information providers. He is known for his passion on topics such as access and managing online identities, the semantic web, taxonomies and discoverability, and mobile and cross-platform delivery. Before founding Semantico in 1999, Richard worked for Macmillan, where he developed an online version of the Grove Dictionaries of Art and Music. There he specialized in building workflow tracking systems for multi-volume reference works, HTML content management systems, and typesetting. Richard has a degree in computer science from Sussex University and lives in Brighton.
Cool. Right. Thanks, Melanie. Good afternoon, everyone. So I started off with that question, do we need an app for that? And I kind of realized, for me anyway, that that was the wrong question. Because it's a bit too far down the chain. Some of you might be at that stage, I guess, looking around the room earlier with hands as to, well, how many people have either sort of got an app out already or are thinking of having an app out already. You may well be, at that decision point. But to me, that's kind of a way down the stack in terms of the different things that you need to consider. And so I kind of took a step back a little bit from that concrete question into some of the kind of bigger picture issues. Because although I am a technologist, and I probably will mention CSS3 media queries at least once in this presentation, I didn't want to go down too deep into the tech. So there's going to be a mixture here of kind of technical issues, strategic things for sure, a little bit of kind of war stories too as well thrown in there. But I do think that we need to kind of, and this is kind of in a way a really nice segue from what Drew was saying. We need to learn some stuff from the consumer web actually, and from consumer and B2C in general. And that's kind of maybe a hard lesson for in scholarly publishing, which has always considered itself to be at the forefront of kind of digital and putting content online. We tend to think of ourselves as having solved a lot of those problems already, and whatever goes on in other parts of the web or in other sectors is something that sometimes we pat ourselves on the back and say, well, we sorted it out. We put these articles online. Gosh, how long ago was it? It was Tim Berners-Lee practically invented the web for us. So, I wanted to up the ante because I think, there are some important things there that are going on in the kind of B2C world. And so, I think that does, we can all acknowledge that those things raise the stakes. And, I think that there's also a question there which is behind this idea of raising the stakes, which is just that, do we think that, investing in mobile generally is risky, and it is we have, our users in Scholarly are different.
And, they have serious information needs. We're talking about, something that's a bit more than the kind of casual layer of Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. Do we think that our content is different? Is it, it's really quite complex? Maths, tables, figures and diagrams, chemistry, semantic markup. Is it hard to navigate through? Does it not really lend itself very well to mobile? Then there's the kind of really important question, is the value that we get out of it proportionate to the cost of doing it in the first place? And there's plenty of kind of war stories there in terms of how many mobile apps actually fail to break even. There was a recent survey that suggested that 59% of mobile apps actually just fail to break even altogether. So, is that not a risk for us? Are we not a little bit of a risk-averse corner of the web that looks at these kinds of investments and says, there's a risk there. Who else is doing it? Is it worth doing? Here's one. Mobile user experience is frustrating. I mean, this is something that I kind of always bump into, and I'm thinking to myself, why can't we learn these lessons? Who's been frustrated on using some mobile web today? Okay, so it's pretty frustrating out there. I couldn't work out why the Wi-Fi login wouldn't let me log in without having to fiddle around more. But
generally mobile user experience is frustrating. And that is, that's a sign of being a little bit on the bleeding edge sometimes. When we're banging ourselves against frustration there. That's a sign that maybe that's an uncomfortable place for scholarly publishing to be in. But what I'm going to say is that I don't think any of these statements are 100% true actually. And so let's just sort of zoom in on one of those last points there. Do they make sense for people without girl thumbs? A question
was asked on the user on experienceproject.com, and it's no doubt that it can be frustrating to interact with the mobile internet. We used to building web pages and desktop applications as well, where controls are grouped together in logical groups. And that gives you a good user experience on a desktop application, but it's problematic on a mobile, where we don't all have girl thumbs. And then, there's a question of choice. There's a question of option anxiety, I like to call this. Where, if we scale down literally our desktop applications, our desktop sites onto mobile, do we have too many choices? Is there too much to take on board? What happens, when to what might be a good user experience for a desktop user? When we scale down, that can translate from good, user experience and good information architecture into exactly the opposite, into a poor experience. And then when there are too many choices, it's the kind of Chinese restaurant menu syndrome. You have so much choice that you fail to be able to make any choice, and so you just bail out. That's a real danger. That's a real worry. And so these are serious issues that we need to take on board. And I'm going to kind of keep on painting. No, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to be entirely negative throughout this. But these are important things that we have to take into account. The mobile network infrastructure, it creaks, it groans. There are factors there that are beyond our control, as well as the ones that are inside our control. So and we know that from the desktop world, even 100 milliseconds of extra delay on page turn people away. I'm kind of frustrated sometimes and surprised when when we think that a search result can come back in 10, 15, 20, 30 seconds, and that's fine for our users in Scotland. It's not fine. There are many, many, many studies that show you get real attrition, even in the sub-second level. It damages the brand permanently. Google have done all sorts of A/B testing around that. There's some fantastic studies. But this is an issue on mobile. But these issues are not terminal. They're not terminal issues. And what I want to try and step through now in this presentation is some important nuggets of information, some important lessons that we can learn and take away. But where I'd start is, and this is again just sort of picking up from one of the points that Drew just made. Why are we here? Well, one of the reasons why we're here is to talk about mobile. And the reason we're talking about mobile is because it's growing, and it's growing at a much faster rate than desktop, and it's overtaking desktop, according to these figures, which are a couple of years old, and they come from Gartner as well. We'll look at that transition point. You could call it a tipping point, but I think it's just a crossover point, where the desktop installed base is growing, but really rather slowly, and the mobile web use space is growing, but really rather quickly. And that plays out in the traffic figures we'll see, and I'll come to that in a few moments. So one thing's true, and I'll come back again when we talk about monetization a little bit later, but I'll touch on this now. App stores, the existence of app stores wouldn't exist without the mobile web and without Apple in particular. And they are a significant new channel. They open up a potential market in scholarly publishing, which may not have been able to reach before, because so much of our business is centered around the kind of institutional sale and the idea into the library infrastructure, and it's a B2B sale. And so there's a potential market there which we may not have been able to reach. Some of you obviously will be able to reach individual users, but many of you won't. And so there's potential there in apps and in the mobile web generally to reach out to a market that's that's maybe, you know, a new market, or at least expanding on that kind of individual purchase. However, there are issues there. It's not easy to square the kind of model we're used to, the institutional sale model, with Apple's ecosystem particularly. Apple's whole ecosystem is geared to the individual purchaser. And trying to meld that with the idea of library sales, with membership sales of, you know, circulating your journals to individual members, is either impossible or a big struggle. And that's one thing you know, no doubt we can pick me up on this one later. But there are significant difficulties with banging those round pegs into square holes, and you'll find yourself kind of deviating round and giving things away and trying to put the thing into the model that works with Apple. But that's, you know, in a way, there's a challenge there, and that's kind of the bigger theme that I wanted to sort of float up in this talk, which is that, you know, maybe some of the content that works best as an app is not going to be your journal content, or maybe it's going to be subsets of that content, maybe it's going to be other pieces of content, other assets that you've got, that you produce as part of the scholarly publishing process, that actually work really, really well as app. That are a big success in a way that just simply reproducing your journal website as an app wouldn't be. You know, that might well be, you know, in the professional arena. You may well have, you know, manuals or handbooks that are used by people in the field. That, you know, they might not be as sexy as the new geographic apps, but they may well have a real monetization potential, and they may well have a real B2C sales potential that you can leverage through these channels. So that's what I wanted to say, in the sense of, you know, apps might not be the real question there. It's maybe a question to challenge ourselves a little bit more and think about what, you know, might not look like an obvious place to start. We might all be thinking journals online, journals as apps, or journals through the App Store. That's the obvious place. We've been here before, but there may well be other opportunities that are there, and so I wanted to challenge everyone to think about that. But kind of contextualizing this a bit more, just, you know, because you know, going back to this sort of consumer idea, you know, PayPal. And this is specifically payments through mobile infrastructure. So, you know, in 2009, PayPal took $141 million, up to $750 million in 2010. 2011 is $4 billion. In 2012, predicted at least to be $7 billion. Now, obviously, that's pretty exciting in terms of growth of m-commerce. And so that's something that, you know, we need to take notice of this. And, you know, going again into the sort of consumer side, you know, people like Richard Branson are excited by that. He should be excited by that. He looks excited, doesn't he? And he does that kind of excited quite well. You know, and you know, there's a huge growth in the number of devices. We've got this huge proliferation between all the different handsets, particularly on the Android side. You know, that all opens up opportunities. And it creates potential to innovate. However, this is what VirginAmerica.com looks like on your mobile phone at the moment. You know, his users down. He's failing to take, you know,
that opportunity by the grasp that opportunity by the horns and actually wrestle with that and do something useful. And that's this is a very high traffic website. You know, it's so, you know, there's a real issue there, and so not everything that I'm going to say from B2C actually is lessons that we need to learn. Well, this is a lesson we need to learn, but it may not be one we can hold up as being kind of exemplary. Jacob Nielsen, again, observing users suffer during our sessions reminded us of the very first usability studies we did with traditional websites in 1994. It was that bad. Of course, it's never one to overstate those kind of things, but you know, going back to what I said, you know, the user experience design on mobile is still in its infancy. We're still making up the technology. We're still learning the lessons. There's a lot of cutting edge stuff that goes on that, you know, and there are still genuine problems with the technology and compromises that have to be made. But
there are reasons to be cheerful. And that's partly because there's a bunch of lessons to learn. So what I wanted to do is just pick 3 things. I thought, let's pick 3 things that I think are common sense lessons. And this kind of goes a little bit on strategy, a little bit on tech, and a little bit on our own experiences at Semantico. So I wanted to look at 3 common sense lessons. And so the first is looking at micro experiences, being focused on responsive experiences, and being focused on monetizable experiences as well. So they all sound a little bit mysterious. I'm just going to follow up on those in the next slides. But before we get there, I've got some numbers. Anyone guess at what they might be? It's fairly cryptic, actually. So if you want to be brave,
if you don't want to be brave, I'll tell you anyway. So, on the left we've got what Google reported as the proportion of traffic, of mobile traffic that they saw last year on their websites. Roughly 28%. That's quite a substantial number, and there's no wonder then that that there's a lot of mobile development happening and there's a lot of excitement. The 4% is what we see at Semantico on the majority of our websites, which are focused broadly into this sector, into the kind of libraries using scholarly and academic content. Your figures might be different, but there's a huge disparity there nonetheless. And does this should we question this? Does this show that we're right to be cautious, to be lagging behind the kind of consumer side of things in taking mobile seriously? Or does it mean that that we've got to look at some other issues? So I'm going to go on from there into what I'm calling offensive micro experience, and I'm not going to offend anyone here. But what I mean by that is that these are, where we're being proactive. It's a proactive strategy to actually take advantage of the nature of mobile, of the nature of the things that are afforded to us by apps and by mobile development generally. So, and so that's being proactive. That's the way I want to use that word in that sense. So a micro experience is really what I'm trying to talk about there is an experience that doesn't overwhelm or perplex our customer. So, and it's going to go beyond simplifying the user interface and think about how to architect an experience from the ground up that's small and beautifully formed, just like the kids there. 3 examples of what I would argue are micro experiences. We've got the HSBC website, which strips away everything. It focuses in really very, very singularly on letting you check your balance, your bank balance, on the go. It's doing one thing and it's trying to do it well. Similarly, the BBC mobile experience. What the BBC are doing there is just picking, a very small selection of content that's tailored down, so it looks at your location, it looks at if you've got any preferences that you've registered on their site or history, it's taking that into account too. But it's doing the geolocation thing, and it's just picking out a selection, a small amount of content, and trying to do that well. It's a micro experience in that sense. And similarly, eBay mobile website, same thing. We're limiting, there's a huge number of categories on eBay. We're limiting that to the most popular, the most obvious categories. We're not confusing the user. We're stripping everything away in a very, very aggressive way. There's a talk of designing mobile first, which is a kind of contrasting approach in a sense to the one that Drew was talking about, where we're designing a product. Really thinking about the minimum possible, focusing on sharpening your proposition and doing one thing really, really well. And the kind of canonical example of this, which goes outside of mobile, is Google, of course. Google for a long time have been brave enough to say we have a very bare homepage. It's a very bare interface. It just does one thing and it does it really, really well. And so there's plenty of context that you can draw from that. And it takes courage to do that. So, I'd say sharpen your proposition, do one thing well, fight one battle. Content should be glanceable.
this would be obviously pretty arguably easy
to do if you with just thinking about to the journal side again with abstracts. Hey, that's a glanceable piece of content, but I wanted us to think outside of that box if we can. Think small and architect from the ground up. Don't think about what you've got in the sense of all the entire bag of bits, but thinking from the smallest possible unit. Here's a big one, and one that we're all kind of very, very familiar with if we're into kind of product development, into software development. Pushing back, actually resisting pressure to add more. Don't add the bells and whistles. Don't add the personalization logins. Think about what's the core. What's the core of what's really, really useful. And be agile. Again, another theme from the whole conference is, if you're going to think small, if you're going to be, sharpening the proposition and honing it down to one, singular idea, then that gives you agility. That lets you iterate quickly. That lets you, if you fail fast. You move on quickly. So there's some observations on that side. I'm going to move on to the second lesson now. We talk about defensive, responsive experiences. So again, this is about thinking about defensive strategies. It really means about protecting your content, protecting your offering, and making sure that you don't drop the ball. And what that means in concrete terms is there's a lot of devices out there. We don't even know what's coming out round the corner. We don't know what resolution the next iPhone's going to have. We don't know which tablets are going to grow. We need to be defensive against this. We need strategies on a technical sense that let us defend against that. So this is about having your mobile offering adapt itself, responding to the sizes that are out there, not hard coding, not saying, well, we need a version for tablet, a version for mobile, a version for the desktop. This is about saying, well, can we have one version that works in all three circumstances, please? How are we going to do that? What's the technical challenge around that? So there's this new idea called responsive design. Responsive design is a way of changing the look and feel of your website so that you adjust automatically to those different screen sizes. It's not about coding specifically a mobile website anymore. The whole idea is that you sustain your branding, you sustain your look and feel, and you shift around your content and your layouts to adapt to different screen sizes. That's kind of takes quite a lot of words to explain it. I can show you what it looks like by showing you how you resize a browser and how the design just flows in and out. So we can see this is a good example here. 3-column layout drops down to 2 columns, drops down to 1 column, masthead changes. Navigation changes at the top. So although I'm illustrating that in a way as showing you resizing a browser, the effect is that when you're accessing from different screen size devices, you just get one of those built-in transitions at different sizes, and it lets you have a very, very fluid approach while still maintaining all of the important elements in your navigation, sometimes collapsing and hiding them away when you get to a smaller screen size. It's called responsive design. It's very much an emerging trend at the moment, but there are some user experience patterns in there. These are a few from a blogger called I'm not going to say this, Robluski. He was calling this one is called mostly fluid, the idea being that the layout stays pretty much the same until you get to the left-hand side of the screen over there, where then the columns stack up on top of each other. This one he calls column drop, again gradually dropping columns from 3 to 2 to 1. This one is a layout shifter, so we can actually change the layout of the columns and the panels on the page. I really wish I was standing over there. The problem with this presentation is that everybody's looking over here, and I'm standing over there. This one's called layout shifter. I'm shifting now. This one, he calls this one tiny tweaks. Okay.
Been rescued. Thank you. Hello? Yeah, good. Right, it's far too loud. This one we're calling layout shift. This one's called tiny tweak. This one, in fact, I don't really need to do. I'm just being a bit gratuitous with that. This one's called off canvas. The idea here being that you actually have, when you zoom down to the smaller size screen, you have elements that are actually on the page but not visible. Again, there's some technical subtleties in all of this, and this is where I mentioned that magic word CSS3 media queries. You can ask me about that afterwards. We're on to the next lesson in a way. So, next lesson is just because a lot of us are here for a reason. Sometimes it's because we're for-profit publishers. Sometimes it's because we have a mission and our publishing activities help us sustain the mission. But they need we're talking about monetizable experiences. And so this is my final lesson, and it's about, in a way, it's about actually demanding value. It's about saying, well, we expect a return. And so, this is kind of draw on a story from our own experience at Semantico, where, we know that all purchase models, they have one thing in common, which is making transactions as painless as possible, because we know that, again, the more friction we add into the payment, the more likely it is we're going to have attrition, and we will lose users along the way. So I wanted to share these lessons, a very simple lesson that we learned in developing so one of the things that we do at Semantico is a lot of what we do is content sites. And one of our big products is called SAMS. It's an access management system that lets you control and monetize, access to those sites. So, we needed to deal with mobile because, despite the fact that we're in an environment where most of the content we put out gets sold to libraries, and the kind of still, after all this time, the dominant model for access is IP-based. We have shibboleth, sure, we have other methods for authenticating users. We still have a pressing need, actually, to develop a way of letting users log in whilst they're in a library, for example, within their kind of institutional framework. Give them a passport, what we're calling it, roaming passport, and then take that passport away and use it wherever they go. And the fact that they were able to authenticate through their institution in the first place gives them the right to do that for a defined period of time. So this is a kind of concept that we want to develop, and this is about monetization. I'll come on to that in a moment. But that's the kind of basic concept of it. Here's how it works. So we have 4 steps, helpfully labeled. In step 1, basically the user, first of all, has to be authenticated. As I say, they probably are using IP address, but they may well be using shibboleth, they may well be using referrer authentication, any of the ways you can possibly imagine that we've dreamt up, but still mostly IP these days. They ask for a roaming passport. They're prompted to save with a nice big button on their mobile device the roaming passport. Technically what's going on here is we're saving a cookie, obviously, on their device. Anybody here from the UK? Yeah, we've got a bit of a problem with cookies at the moment, but that's our problem. So we probably don't need to talk about that now. But anyway, that sounded cryptic. It's because there's some insane EU legislation about prompting users. This site wants to save a cookie. Do you want this to happen? And actually making people click yes. I know you probably haven't heard about this, but that's the kind of insane thing that happens sometimes with legislators when they don't understand technology. Anyway, God, I went right off track there. Step 3, a prompt saying that, they've saved the roaming passport to the device. Information, you're going to be able to log in now with that device until the 15th of November in this case. Step 4 is just, now I'm roaming around, I'm accessing the site. And it works. I'm logged in straight away by virtue of the fact of having my passport on me. So, and that's the kind of, now where this comes back to the monetization side is
in a couple of obvious ways. First of all, we're driving up usage, and that's important because when we look at our counter stats, we're finding that, yes, the subscription is going to be renewed because people have been able to keep on using the content. We've driven up usage by just enabling access more in a much more smooth way. So that's driving our repeat subscription kind of revenue stream. Also, for patron-driven acquisition, that means, well, we know who this person is, that we know that they're authenticated through that library. If we have PDA working as a business model, then we can trigger that PDA purchase, and we're actually generating revenue on that side too. So it's not the same as m-commerce in the PayPal sense, but this is a kind of, if you like, maybe the take from the scholarly side of things, one way of generating some of those effects, and without pay. So, in conclusion, be defensive or be offensive, but demand a return. Because he does. Thanks very much.
Do we have a couple of questions for Richard? Might just come up to the mic.
Did you say that the roaming passport is something you are developing or have developed?
So it's something that we're going to launch in about a month's time. It's just going through the final stage of testing, but yeah, it's part of our SAMS product.